1966 was a very special year for Chevrolet, and part of that is because the 1966 full-size Chevrolets had just a new, distinctive, fresh look that capitalized on a further evolution of the design that was introduced for 1965. The 1965 full-size Chevrolets, I think, are some of the best looking, and I actually like them better over the 66s. But the 66 Chevrolets are also great looking vehicles, and also, I have to say that 66 was a special year because it was the first full model year of the Chevrolet Caprice, the range-topping automobile that Chevrolet introduced to replace the Impala. Now, why in the world would Chevrolet try to displace the Impala at the top end of the range and push their overall lineup more upmarket? After all, they were a mainstream brand. Well, it was really precipitated by one event, and that is the introduction of the 1965 Ford LTD. In 1965, Ford introduced the LTD as its range topper on the Galaxy lineup, and the LTD just had so many rich and luxurious features. The interior was far beyond anything that was available in a mainstream full-size Ford for the time, and it proved to be an absolute runaway success. It was so successful, in fact, that Chevrolet tasked its interior designers with coming up with a new interior for the Impala that could compete with the LTD. And as a result, partway through the 1965 model year, and only on four-door vehicles, you could get the Caprice option, which gave you this extremely handsome interior with some buttons on the seats, as well as, well, it just looks luxurious and rich. They did a rather effective job, I would say, in gussying up what was a more pedestrian Impala interior. And just like the LTD, Chevrolet's effort proved successful in 1965, and so 1966 saw the first full year of the Caprice. Now, I have to say that the 65 Caprice that you see here is pretty special. We're not going to make this the feature of the video, but this has a paint color called Evening Orchid, which actually was designed by the same designer who put together the interior of the 65 Caprice, a man by the name of Blaine Jenkins. And I love this particular 65 Caprice because it's a manual transmission car, a 3-speed on the column. How cool is that? You get a luxurious Chevrolet with a 3-speed column shift. In any case, I digress yet again, but there are a couple things to remember about the 1965 Caprice. And before we turn into the 1966 Caprice and discussing about it, let's talk about those for a quick moment. And that is that when a buyer checked off the Caprice Custom Sedan Equipment Package, option code Z18 on the 1965 Caprice, they paid about $240, or the equivalent of about $2,400 today, on top of the Impala's $2,850 base price. So it was a relatively expensive option to get the Caprice, and you not only got the upgraded interior, but you also got a upgraded frame on the vehicle even that had heavier gauge steel that was found on the Caprice versus other full-size Chevrolets. And you got full-length rocker panel reinforcements, which provided greater rigidity to the four-door hardtop body style, and a stronger underbody crossbar. So the overall car was better. It wasn't just the interior option. And it's kind of funny, the interior was apparently done over the course of about 2 weeks. That was the time that it took interior designers to revamp the 1965 Impala's interior, and they did a great job. In any case, as we go to 1966, that stiffer frame would be used across all full-size Chevrolets, so they all got that benefit. But there was something very special about the 1966 Caprice, and that was that it got its own unique roofline for 1966, different from the fastback Impala's roofline, which still existed in 1966. I suppose I should be a bit more specific there in that it was the two-door that got its own roofline for 66 that was exclusive. The four-door still had the same roofline. But it's pretty amazing that Chevrolet was able to get approval for a unique roofline on the two-door only Caprice. But that is what happened. And it's this kind of notchback roofline that is formal in appearance. And what do I mean by that? That the C-pillar is rather vertical. And this was a styling cue that dated back all the way to the coach building eras that was really there to help give the rear seat passengers more privacy and became a luxury car trait that many vehicles, including Cadillacs, displayed, especially during this time. Now, what's also interesting about it is that Ford copied this two-door roofline on their two-door vehicles for 1968. So Chevrolet had kind of copied the LTD with the Caprice, and then Ford copied the unique Caprice roofline in 1968 when it redid the roofline for all of its two-doors to be something more formal, although Mercury kept the fastback roofline that was introduced for 1967, kept that into 1968. Ford dropped it for the 1968 model year in favor of a roofline that looked more like the Caprice, which I actually don't think looked as good as the fastback roofline. On the inside of the Caprice, there were some changes as well. The seat stitch pattern and the buttons were rather similar to the 1965 model year, but the 1965 model year had real wood accents, and Chevrolet, as you can imagine, imposed some cost-cutting measures, of course, and went back to fake wood for the 1966 Caprice, but it still looks rather tasteful overall. You could now get straight-o-back front seats that appeared to be almost bucket seats, but they were instead a bench, and they had a pull-down center armrest, so could get a little bit more comfort, or you could get a vehicle with a floor console as well. Overall, the 66 Caprice became a success yet again, and the Caprice hardtop sold 107,000 units, and the four-door sold 74,000 units, roughly doubling the overall production from the 1965 model year, and again, really set the Caprice on a pathway to be a long-time successful vehicle for Chevrolet. And it's no wonder. I mean, the 66 Caprice is just a handsome vehicle. And there were some other details that designers changed for 1966. The front end treatment was a little bit different. I do love these domed center hubcaps, or wheel covers, I should say, that were introduced for 66. Pretty cool. And then the designers elected to go with, I would say, more conventional horizontal tail lamps. Although on the Caprices, you got these thin chrome bars that kind of separated the tail lights, and looks rather nice overall. And now for a treat, we're going to walk around a very special 1966 Caprice two-door hardtop coupe that you see here. Now, what's so special about this one? Well, it's a 396 big block, 325 horsepower, factory four-speed car, as you're going to see here. You can see the shifter on the interior. We'll come back to that in a second. But notice this formal roofline that I was talking about, as well as those fake vents underneath the backlight. That was something that GM did for a number of years. Even the 58 Impala had that fake vent at the top of it. Here you've got two fake vents. And notice those horizontal tail lamps that I mentioned before with the very thin chrome bars on them. An overall tasteful and elegant look. And this Caprice overall, I think elegant is a great adjective for it. This was a relatively small vehicle when it came to full-size car standards, rode atop 119-inch wheelbase. And as you went up in the General Motors lineup, you got longer wheelbase cars. But this 119-inch wheelbase just looks right on the Caprice, and this one also has the optional wire wheel covers. Notice that there's that faux carriage bow, too, on the roof, kind of a holdover from the early 60s. Here you see the interior. This is a non-AC car, so you got the three different HVAC controls. The clock is mounted on the dash, which was something that came with these Caprices and Impalas when you got the tachometer in the gauge cluster, because there was no place to put the clock. So that is not aftermarket. That is indeed stock. And here you can see the button-tufted interior, a little bit less rich than the 1965 version. And the wood, as I mentioned, was fake by this point versus real wood that was in the 1965 Caprices. But it's hard to complain. Remember, this car was Chevrolet's luxury vehicle, and I think they did a great job overall. It just looks like a rich vehicle and one that you would want to own. In fact, take a look at this 1966 front end, and you can see this trapped hood design, meaning that there's a front panel in front of where the hood closes. That was a more expensive treatment than the typical hood that would extend all the way out and overlap the grille. Let's walk around this car one more time. You can see that quarter panel kind of bulges out and up. This is the waning years of the so-called Coke bottle styling, meaning that that quarter panel has that kick up as well as bulge out. Not as pronounced, and that styling would really be gone from General Motors vehicles as the 1960s would wear on, although Ford would continue using it on a number of cars, including the early 70s Torinos that had some very Coke bottle-y styling, I guess is what I would call it. I love the tasteful and kind of clean body side sections that you see on this vehicle. They don't have a huge amount of surfacing, just that beautiful feature line that runs the entire length of the vehicle and accentuates the side, gives it a little bit of form. And then, of course, like most GM vehicles and vehicles of the era, the lower portion, the rocker area, kind of tucks under and helps make the wheels look like they're pushed further outboard than they are. Again, you can see this interior with the 4-speed and the beautiful steering wheel. The individual who owns this car is a master Chevrolet restorer. I think he does the best job of anyone that I've ever seen. He is absolutely meticulous in details, and this was a car to restore for sure. And here's the principal reason why this car was restored to such top-flight condition. It's what's under hood. As I mentioned, the 396 cubic inch, 325 horsepower big block V8. This engine made its introduction in 1965, but it was kind of the first of the big block engines that you could get in your Caprice. They came standard with a 283 cubic inch, 195 horsepower V8. You get a 220 horsepower 283. There was a 327. You could get this 396 with 325 horsepower, and then the choice of two 427 cubic inch mills, one that made 390 horsepower, the other that made 425 gross horsepower. So this was the entry-level big block. What's kind of humorous about it is, while this is a 4-speed car and a factory 4-speed at that, you could get a power glide behind this 396. This is the largest engine for Chevrolet that you could get, teamed with the power glide in this particular model year. If you got the 427s, you had to get the turbo-hydromatic transmission in the event you wanted an automatic. This is a 1966, so it's the last year for that single chamber brake master cylinder that you can see on the firewall. And this, again, is restored to absolutely pristine factory settings, including the overspray on the exhaust manifolds, as well as the bypass hose on the water pump. That was how they came from the factory. And again, the individual who owns this car is just meticulous at restoring his vehicles. And here's the other side. You can again see that overspray on the exhaust manifolds. That was how they came from the factory. And even the hose clamps are correct in this. Take a look at that kind of A-style clamp on the radiator hose, those tension clamps on the heater hoses, the chalk mark on the firewall. The individual who restores these just does a great job. But a very special vehicle when this 396 mil is under hood. The Caprices from 1966 overall are great lookers, but I think that this one is just a very special car and worthy of commenting on. I will just close with a little anecdote about how the Caprice was named, as that is something that people often wondered. And one of the stories was that the chief designer for Chevrolet during the time, a gentleman by the name of Irv Verbicki, who would later go on to lead General Motors design as its vice president, lived across the street from a family where the daughter's name was Caprice Chapman. And that's one of the stories, at least. And apparently when the Caprice came out, he gave Caprice Chapman a wood plaque with the Caprice inscription on it, that kind of cursive script on it. Not sure if that is entirely true, but it's certainly a feasible story and one that was actually validated by Caprice Chapman. And she did, in fact, live across the street from the chief designer of Chevrolet during the time. So, hope you enjoyed this spotlight on the 1966 Caprice and this very special one, a 396 4-speed powered car. Let me know what you think of it. Put a comment in the comment section. Thanks again for watching. Until next time, take care.